Marcus Harrison straightened his midnight blue diplomatic uniform as his shuttle approached the crystalline spires of Nixus. The alien world's 3 moons cast prismatic shadows across the planet's surface, creating an ever-shifting kaleidoscope of colors that had earned it the nickname the Jewel of the Outer Rim. "Ambassador Harrison, we're beginning our descent," announced the pilot. "The Nixians are expecting us at the Crystal Court." Marcus nodded, reviewing his briefing one final time. After 15 years in the diplomatic corps, he'd earned a reputation for unconventional solutions to interstellar disputes. His superiors called him brilliant but unpredictable. His colleagues called him lucky. He called himself practical. The shuttle glided through layers of iridescent clouds before touching down on a landing pad that seemed to be made of pure light. A delegation of tall, ethereal beings waited nearby, their translucent skin shimmering with internal bioluminescence. At their head stood Royal Advisor Celine, whose reputation for intelligence and mystery preceded her. "Ambassador Harrison," Celine stepped forward, her voice carrying musical undertones that all Nixians shared. "Welcome to the Crystal Court. I trust your journey was comfortable." Marcus bowed with practiced grace. "Advisor Celine, the voyage was excellent. Though I admit, your world's beauty exceeds even the most elaborate descriptions." Something flickered in Celine's opalescent eyes, amusement perhaps. "You'll find many things here defy description, Ambassador. Queen Lysandra awaits you in the Grand Hall." As they walked through corridors of living crystal, Marcus noticed the strange looks from passing courtiers. There was something in their expressions beyond the usual curiosity about humans, something that made his diplomatic instincts prickle with warning. The Grand Hall took his breath away. Massive crystals grew from floor to ceiling, each one containing what appeared to be a star's heart, bathing the chamber in warm, pulsing light. Queen Lysandra sat upon a throne that seemed carved from a single diamond, her 3 daughters arranged on smaller seats beside her. "Ambassador Harrison," the Queen's voice resonated through the chamber. "We've heard much about your unique approach to diplomacy." Marcus bowed deeply. "Your Majesty honors me. I look forward to discussing the trade agreements that will benefit both our peoples." A slight smile played across the Queen's lips. "Yes, trade, among other things. Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know of Nixian succession rights?" The question caught him off guard. It wasn't on any briefing he'd received. "I confess, Your Majesty, my knowledge is limited. I understand your society places great importance on maternal lineage." Indeed. Queen Lysandra rose, her gown appearing to flow like liquid starlight. "And do you know why we specifically requested you for these negotiations?" Marcus glanced at Celine, whose face remained carefully neutral. "I assumed it was due to my record of successful treaties." Laughter like crystal wind chimes filled the hall. "Oh, Ambassador, your diplomatic achievements were merely a convenient coincidence. You see, our genetic surveys identified you as possessing certain desirable traits that would strengthen the royal bloodline." The warning bells in Marcus's mind became klaxons. He maintained his diplomatic smile, even as he realized the trade negotiations were merely a pretext. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure I understand." "It's quite simple." Queen Lysandra gestured to her daughters, who rose in unison. "One of my daughters must choose a mate before they can ascend to the throne. We found human genetics particularly compatible with our own. You, Ambassador Harrison, have been selected as a potential consort." Marcus's mind raced. He'd handled first contact situations, prevented interstellar wars, and once talked his way out of being sacrificed to a sun god. But this was definitely not in the diplomatic handbook. He became acutely aware of Celine's presence beside him, her subtle tension suggesting the situation wasn't as straightforward as the queen presented. The three princesses regarded him with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation to what might have been disdain. "This is unexpected," Marcus said carefully. "On Earth, such arrangements typically involve more discussion beforehand." "Ah, but you humans place such strange emphasis on individual choice," the queen replied. "Here on Nixus, we understand that personal desire must serve the greater good. My daughters will evaluate your suitability over the next 3 cycles. I'm sure you'll find the process enlightening." As Marcus formulated a response that wouldn't trigger an interstellar incident, he caught Celine's subtle headshake. There was more going on here than a simple arranged marriage. "Much more, Your Majesty," he bowed again, buying time to think. "While I'm deeply honored by this opportunity, surely there are diplomatic protocols that must be observed." Of course, Queen Lysandra smiled. "Advisor Celine will explain everything. Do remember, Ambassador, refusing such an honor could have significant consequences for Earth-Nixian relations." Celine led Marcus through twisting corridors of living crystal, their footsteps echoing in the luminous passages. Once they were safely away from the grand hall, she pulled him into a secluded alcove, her opalescent eyes scanning for potential observers. "You've been placed in a dangerous position, Ambassador," she whispered, her musical voice tense. "The succession contest isn't as simple as the queen presented." Marcus leaned against the crystal wall, crossing his arms. "I gathered as much. Why don't you tell me what's really going on here?" "Our society is at a crossroads," Celine explained. "For millennia, we've used genetic engineering to maintain what we consider perfection. But our birth rates are declining, our children becoming less viable with each generation. Some of us believe it's time for change." Before she could continue, footsteps approached. Princess Venna, the eldest, rounded the corner. Her crystalline skin caught the light like morning frost, but her eyes held winter's chill. "Advisor Celine," she said coolly, "I'll take charge of the ambassador now. Mother wants him properly prepared for tonight's feast." Celine bowed and departed, though not before throwing Marcus a warning glance. Princess Venna's attention fixed on him with unsettling intensity. "Walk with me, Ambassador," she commanded rather than requested. "Let's discuss your potential contribution to the Nixian bloodline." The next few hours became a blur of increasingly uncomfortable conversations. Each princess approached him with their own agenda. Venna spoke of duty and genetic optimization. Lyra, the middle daughter, attempted to charm him with discussions of Earth culture and hints at political alliance. Nera, the youngest, barely concealed her disdain for the whole process. By the time the feast began, Marcus's diplomatic training was stretched to its limits. The banquet hall sparkled with floating lights and crystalline decorations, but he couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched from every angle. "You're handling this better than our last candidate," a familiar voice said. Celine appeared beside him, offering a glass of shimmer-wined wine. He fled after the first daughter's interview, probably because he wasn't trained to handle interstellar incidents. Marcus replied, accepting the drink. "Though I admit, this situation is testing my skills." "The princesses aren't the real problem," Celine murmured, watching the crowd. "Queen Lysandra's agenda goes far beyond finding her daughters suitable mates. She's using this contest to maintain control over Nixian evolution itself." Marcus studied her profile, noting the subtle differences between her features and the royal families. "And where do you stand in all this, advisor?" Before she could answer, Queen Lysandra's voice rang out across the hall. "Distinguished guests, we celebrate tonight the beginning of our succession contest. Our three princesses will each have the opportunity to demonstrate their worthiness through their handling of our honored human candidate. Marcus felt dozens of crystalline eyes turn toward him. The queen continued, "The princess who best proves her genetic compatibility and political acumen will not only gain a consort, but also the right to implement her vision for Nyx's future." The implications hit Marcus like a gravity wave. This wasn't just about marriage. It was about the fundamental direction of Nyxian society. Each princess represented a different faction, a different possible future. Vena stepped forward first, her voice carrying across the hall. "I propose a series of trials to test the ambassador's compatibility with our ways. Traditional challenges that will prove his worthiness to join the royal bloodline." Always so formal, Sister Lyra interjected, her tone lighter but no less pointed. "Perhaps we should instead focus on cultural exchange. After all, our people's future lies in adaptation, not stagnation." Nera remained silent, but her gaze held something that made Marcus increasingly uneasy. The youngest princess seemed to be playing a game all her own. As the festivities continued, Marcus found himself drawn into an elaborate dance of politics and genetics. Each princess took turns attempting to gauge his reactions, test his responses, and subtly demonstrate their superiority over their siblings. "Watch your step," Celine warned during a brief moment alone. The princesses aren't just competing for a consort. They're fighting for control of Nyx's future. And there are those who believe that future shouldn't include outside influences at all. Marcus nodded, pieces falling into place. The genetic compatibility issue isn't just about marriage, is it? It's about forcing change, or preventing it. Perceptive, Celine smiled slightly. "Perhaps that's why our genetic surveys found you so suitable. We need new perspectives, Ambassador. But change never comes easily to ancient societies." The feast stretched into the night, a glittering facade masking increasingly complex political maneuvers. Marcus danced with each princess in turn, each dance a calculated display of power and intention. Vena moved with rigid precision, every step a test of his ability to follow tradition. Lyra flowed like liquid starlight, trying to demonstrate the beauty of blending different styles. Naira's dance felt more like combat, testing his reflexes and adaptability. But it was Celine who occupied his thoughts. The royal advisor moved through the court like a shadow, observing, influencing, yet never quite revealing her true position. She wasn't just another player in this game, she was something else entirely. As the three moons of Nyxus rose to their apex, casting rainbow shadows through the Crystal Palace, Marcus realized he wasn't just facing a diplomatic challenge or even a marriage proposal. He was standing at the crossroads of a civilization, and his next moves would ripple through Nyxian society for generations to come. The question was, which future would he help shape? And more importantly, could he trust anyone in this glittering court of secrets and ambition? Even the intriguing advisor who seemed to be his only ally. Dawn on Nyxus brought no respite from the mounting tensions in the Crystal Court. Marcus found himself in his assigned chambers, a space that somehow managed to be both breathtakingly beautiful and subtly alienating, much like his hosts. The walls pulsed with gentle bioluminescence, responding to his movements in ways he couldn't quite predict. A soft chime announced Princess Vena's arrival. She entered without waiting for his response, her crystalline features set in rigid determination. "Ambassador, I trust you've considered my proposal from last night's feast," she said, her tone leaving no room for diplomatic evasion. "Traditional trials would prove your worth to our people." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "And what exactly would these trials entail, Your Highness?" "3 challenges, naturally," Vena replied, pacing with mechanical precision. physical endurance in our crystal caves, mental acuity in our ancient archives, and genetic compatibility testing in our sacred laboratories. Before Marcus could respond, another chime sounded. Princess Lyra swept in, her movement fluid like mercury. "Sister, you're not still pushing those outdated trials, are you?" "Ambassador Harrison isn't some specimen to be tested. He's a bridge between our peoples." The tension between the sisters crackled like static electricity. Marcus noticed how the room's bioluminescence dimmed in response to their emotional energy. "A bridge that could collapse our entire society," a third voice cut in. Princess Nira emerged from a hidden entrance, her presence darker than her sister's. "Have you both forgotten what happened to the Zentari civilization after they allowed genetic mixing?" The Zentari thrived for centuries after opening their genetics. Celine's voice joined the debate as she too entered through the main door. Their eventual decline had nothing to do with genetic diversity. Marcus watched the interplay with growing understanding. Each princess represented not just a potential future, but a faction within Nixian society. Vena championed rigid tradition, Lyra advocated controlled progress, and Nara seemed to oppose any change at all. "Ladies," he interrupted smoothly, "perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle. Instead of debating my trials or worth, shouldn't we discuss what each of you envisions for Nyx's future?" All eyes turned to him, crystalline faces showing varying degrees of surprise. Celine's lips curved in slight approval. "Our visions matter less than our duty," Vena stated firmly. "The genetic purity of our line has led to stagnation," Lyra cut in. "Our children grow weaker with each generation. We need new strength, new perspectives." "We need to preserve what makes us Nixian," Nara countered. "Human genetics are chaotic, unpredictable. They could destroy everything we've built." The argument might have escalated further, but a palace-wide announcement interrupted them. Queen Lysandra requested everyone's presence in the Grand Hall immediately. As they made their way through the crystal corridors, Celine fell into step beside Marcus. "You're beginning to understand the true nature of our crisis," she murmured. "Your society is trapped between progression and preservation," he replied quietly. "But there's something else going on, isn't there? Something you haven't told me." Celine's opalescent eyes flickered. "Meet me in the archive of Whispers at Moonset. There are things you need to know." The Grand Hall had transformed since the previous night's feast. Now it resembled a formal court, with the Queen's crystal throne elevated above tiered seating for various noble houses. Each tier seemed to shimmer with different colors, creating a rainbow hierarchy of power. Queen Lysandra's announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. "The succession trials will begin tomorrow," she declared. "Each princess will have one cycle to prove their worth through their handling of our human candidate. The victor will not only claim the right of succession, but also the power to implement their vision for Nyx's future." Marcus noted how each princess reacted. Vena stood straighter, pride radiating from her crystalline form. Lyra's expression showed calculated pleasure, while Nyra's face betrayed barely concealed contempt. But it was the Queen's next words that truly changed everything. "Furthermore, our genetic surveys have revealed an unexpected development. Ambassador Harrison's DNA contains markers that could potentially reverse centuries of decline in our royal bloodline. His genetic contribution has become not just desirable, but necessary for our survival." The pronouncement sent whispers rippling through the court. Marcus maintained his diplomatic composure, but his mind raced. He wasn't just a potential consort anymore. He'd become the key to Nixian survival. As the court dispersed, Marcus caught fragments of conversations that painted a disturbing picture. Some nobles spoke of him as a resource to be claimed. others as a threat to be eliminated. The political game had just become far more dangerous. When moonset approached, Marcus made his way to the Archive of Whispers, his steps silent on the crystal floors. He found Celine waiting among towering shelves of crystalline data storage, her form barely visible in the dim light. "Now you know the truth," she said without preamble. But not all of it. The Queen's announcement wasn't just about genetics. It was a political move to force her daughter's hands. Each princess has supporters ready to act, and some would rather see Nyxus fall than change. Marcus studied her carefully. "And where do you stand in all this, Celine? What's your real role here?" Her answer would reshape everything he thought he knew about the crystal cord, and set in motion events that would either save Nyxus or tear it apart completely. In the dim light of the Archive of Whispers, Celine's form seemed to shift and change, her crystalline features becoming more fluid. "I am not what I appear to be, Ambassador," she said softly. "I am the result of the last time Nyxus attempted to introduce outside genetics into our bloodline." Marcus watched in fascination as her appearance stabilized, now showing subtle traits that marked her as neither purely Nyxian nor completely foreign. "You're a hybrid," he realized. "The only successful one," she confirmed. 3 generations ago, another alien species was chosen to strengthen our royal line. I am the sole survivor of those experiments. The Queen keeps me close as both advisor and warning, a reminder of what change could bring. "But you're proof that genetic integration can work," Marcus pointed out. "I'm proof that it's possible, but the cost." Celine's voice trailed off as footsteps echoed through the archive. Princess Nira emerged from the shadows, her expression triumphant. "Proof indeed," she said coldly. "Proof that outsiders cannot be trusted. Did our human ambassador know he was conspiring with a genetic aberration?" Before either could respond, more figures appeared, supporters of each princess, positioned to block every exit. The Archive of Whispers had become a trap. "This isn't about genetics," Marcus stated firmly, his diplomatic training kicking in. "This is about fear of change. Your society is dying, Princess Nira, and you'd rather let it fade away than risk evolution. Better to fade with dignity than become something we're not," Nira countered. "Guards, seize them both. The Queen will want to know about this conspiracy." But as the guards moved forward, the crystal walls suddenly pulsed with intense light. Princess Lyra stepped out of a hidden passage, followed by her own supporters. "Stand down, sister. You're not the only one who can plan an ambush. Stop this madness." Princess Venna's voice rang out as she too appeared with her faction. "We are Nyxian royalty, not common conspirators." The Archive had become a powder keg of competing loyalties and agendas. Marcus noticed how the crystal walls resonated with the mounting tensions, their light fluctuating wildly. "Look at your walls," he said loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "Your very architecture is telling you something. These crystals respond to harmony, don't they? They're showing us how far you've strayed from balance." Celine stepped forward, her hybrid nature now openly displayed. "He's right. Our ancestors built these structures to reflect the state of our society. The discord you see is a warning. We must evolve or perish. And who are you to lecture us about Nyxian society?" Nara demanded. "You're nothing but a failed experiment." "She is our future," Lyra countered, moving to stand beside Celine. "Living proof that change can strengthen us." Venna remained silent for a long moment, studying the pulsing crystal walls. Her rigid posture softened slightly. Perhaps there is wisdom in both tradition and progress." The standoff was interrupted by a resonating chime that shook the entire archive. Queen Lysandra's voice echoed through the crystal corridors. The final trial begins now. All parties to the Grand Hall. As the various factions began moving toward the hall, Marcus caught Celine's arm. You knew this would happen. You arranged for all three princesses to discover us here. She smiled slightly. Sometimes the only way to heal a fracture is to first make it visible. Come, Ambassador. It's time to decide the future of Nixus. The Grand Hall had transformed again, its crystal architecture now forming a complex pattern that seemed to flow between order and chaos. Queen Lysandra sat upon her throne, but something had changed in her bearing. She looked older, more tired. My daughters, she began, her voice carrying less certainty than before. You have each shown your true colors tonight. Nera, your dedication to preservation would doom us to extinction. Lyra, your hunger for change risks our identity. And Venna, your rigid adherence to tradition blinds you to necessary evolution. The queen's gaze settled on Celine. Step forward, child. It's time the court knew the truth. Celine is not merely my advisor, she is my granddaughter, born of the last attempt to save our bloodline. I kept her heritage secret, watching to see if any of my daughters would recognize the strength and diversity without prejudice. Gasps and murmurs filled the hall. Marcus watched understanding dawn on the princesses' faces as they realized the full scope of their mother's test. The succession trials were never about choosing a mate for one of my daughters, Queen Lysandra continued. They were about discovering which of you could lead Nixus into a future that balances preservation with progress. Tonight's events have shown me that none of you are ready, but perhaps together you might be. The queen rose, her form seeming to draw light from the very crystals around her. I propose a new path. A council of succession where all voices are heard. Ambassador Harrison's genetics will indeed help save our bloodline, but through careful integration over generations, not through a single royal marriage. Marcus stepped forward. Earth would be honored to help establish a genetic exchange program, one that respects both Nixian tradition and the need for controlled evolution. The crystal walls pulsed with harmonious light as the court considered this unprecedented proposal. Centuries of tradition hung in the balance, but so did the future of an entire civilization. The first rays of Nixus's triple suns painted the crystal court in rainbow hues as the assembled nobles debated the queen's unprecedented proposal. Marcus stood beside Celine, watching the three princesses process their mother's revelation. Princess Venna was the first to step forward, her rigid posture softening as she addressed her newly discovered niece. All these years, you served as advisor, watching us, testing us. We failed to see what was right before us. Perhaps that was the greatest test, Lyra added, her mercury-like movements stilling for once, not seeing beyond our preconceptions. Nera remained silent, but her crystalline features showed the internal struggle between ingrained prejudice and undeniable truth. Queen Lysandra descended from her throne, her voice carrying across the hall. For millennia, we Nixians have prided ourselves on perfection. But true perfection isn't static, it's adaptive. Ambassador Harrison's presence has catalyzed a change long overdue. Marcus stepped forward. Your Majesty, if I may. At her nod, he addressed the court. On Earth, we have a concept called hybrid vigor. When different genetic lines combine, the result is often stronger than either original line. But it must be done with care and respect for both heritages. Celine moved to stand beside him. I am living proof of this principle. My existence was seen as an aberration, but I carry strengths from both my Nixian and foreign ancestry. Strengths our people desperately need. The crystal walls pulsed with gentle light as understanding began to spread through the court. Centuries of tradition were being challenged, but the evidence was undeniable. The royal bloodline needed renewal. A council of succession, Princess Fenna mused. Each of us contributing our strengths rather than competing for total control. Working together instead of against each other, Lyra agreed. But how would this genetic integration proceed? Marcus outlined the proposal he and Celine had developed. A carefully managed program of genetic exchange with Earth and other compatible species. Small steps, closely monitored, with full respect for Nixian culture and traditions. Over generations, Celine added, not a sudden change. We preserve what makes us Nixian while gradually introducing beneficial traits from other species. Princess Nera finally spoke, her voice carrying less hostility than before. And what guarantees do we have that this won't destroy everything we are? None, Queen Lysandra answered honestly. But we have guarantee that refusing to change will lead to our extinction. The choice is between controlled evolution and slow death. The court erupted in discussion, but the tone had shifted from fear to cautious hope. The crystal architecture responded, its light stabilizing into a harmonious pattern that hadn't been seen in generations. One by one, the noble houses pledged support for the new direction. Even those most resistant to change could not deny the wisdom of a gradual, controlled approach. Then let it be recorded, Queen Lysandra declared. The Council of Succession is established, with my 3 daughters and Celine as its founding members. Ambassador Harrison will serve as Earth's liaison for the genetic exchange program. Marcus caught Celine's eye, seeing in her opalescent gaze a future neither of them had imagined when this all began. Their connection had grown beyond politics or genetics. They had become symbols of what their peoples could achieve together. As the formal ceremony concluded, the 3 princesses approached them. Venus spoke for her sisters. We spent so long competing, we forgot how to cooperate. Perhaps that was our mother's greatest lesson. The future belongs to those who can adapt while remembering who they are. Celine replied, her hybrid features now displayed proudly. The integration program would take years to implement fully, but already changes were visible in the crystal court. The rigid hierarchy began to flex, allowing new ideas to flow more freely. The crystal architecture responded, its patterns becoming more complex and beautiful than ever. Marcus's role evolved from potential royal consort to something far more significant, a bridge between worlds, helping guide 2 civilizations toward a stronger future together. As the 3 suns set on that historic day, Marcus and Celine stood in the palace gardens, watching the crystal spires reflect the changing light. Your grandmother played a very long game, he observed. Celine smiled. She had to. Some changes can't be forced. They must grow naturally, like crystals forming in deep caves. And us? Marcus asked, taking her hand. Was this part of her plan too? I think we surprised everyone, including ourselves, she replied. Sometimes the best futures are the ones we don't plan. The crystal court of Nixus had been transformed, not through revolution or force, but through understanding and acceptance. The rigid patterns of the past had given way to something new, a society that could preserve its essence while embracing change. As Marcus looked toward the future, he realized that his greatest diplomatic achievement hadn't come through negotiation or politics, but through helping a civilization remember that perfection isn't about remaining unchanged. It's about having the wisdom to evolve while keeping your core identity intact. The crystal walls pulsed with warm light, reflecting the harmony of a civilization that had chosen to grow rather than stagnate. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all.